Many in America are waking up to the fact that the systems that are meant to work for us, that are meant to pursue justice, that are meant to ensure that public order and social order are kept and rights of individuals are protected, actually violate and go against all of those things. The Trump prosecution, or I should probably say persecution, because it is both a prosecution and a persecution, is fundamentally unjust. That is what it is on its face. There have been numerous commentators, legal and otherwise, many of whom have no sympathies towards President Trump the man, who have said as much, or whose comments suggest as much. I won't bore all of you with the minutiae, the talking points that explain why all this is unjust. I'll review them. I'll go through them very quickly. The fact that one of the main people for Alvin Bragg, the New York Manhattan District Attorney, who brought the case forward for Donald Trump, Michael Cohen, his chief witness, was literally convicted for lying under oath, despite the fact that Alvin Bragg himself campaigned on getting Donald Trump. Then when Alvin Bragg got into office, initially said, you know what, I won't take the case, but then decided randomly after a few months to take the case, which had at that point been 6 months old, despite the fact that the judge who arraigned Mr. Trump, his daughter has ties to the Democratic Party, and the judge himself has political sympathies which are antithetical to what Mr. Trump believes, which would make you think there would be a conflict of interest, despite the fact, I can go over so many different things, that the indictment itself doesn't specify the crimes that Donald Trump allegedly committed, therefore leaving us at the same exact place we were when these charges were brought about half a decade ago. I can go on and on and on and on about how erroneous, about how foul, about how disgusting this entire thing is. I'm not going to do that though, because you guys can get that from anywhere else. We have to understand what this represents about American society, what this represents about our justice system, and what this tells us about first principles. There are fundamental issues, my friends, that this indictment should point us to, that hopefully will put us in a place where we can correct these egregious abuses of power and public trust. And the fundamental issue is this. It's being missed. It's the fact that the justice system does not and has not worked according to proper principles for a very, very long time. Now, many Americans, many good-natured Americans, are being awoken, are being enlightened to this fact by virtue of what we have seen happen with Mr. Trump, and by virtue of what we have seen happen with the January 6th protesters, 1,003 of which were charged on that day, a majority of which are charged with a nonviolent crime of parading and picketing through a restricted area. A loitering crime, which essentially would, in any other situation, be treated as a misdemeanor and would not be appended with the false epistemic significance that the media and the FBI and the DOJ appended them with, which is, this is an insurrection, it's happening with democracy. See, whenever people try to attach events that are relatively mundane to something of higher significance, and they are doing so in an emotional way, you should be worried. Why should you be worried? Very simple. They're trying to manipulate you. They're trying to use you as a puppet for their political program. We have people in government, people in the media, and people in society which have no regard for this nation or its founding principles. And the evidence, the empirical data is so clear. And why am I mad? I get on this channel every day, almost every day. And I try to proselytize the virtues of the American Republic. I try to tell you guys why it is important to believe in the founding vision of America, why the American constitutional order and the American constitutional ethos The ethos being the principle of the order being the context in which the ethos is enshrined, that ethos being the primacy of the individual, the rights of man arising from his ability to be a reasonable person, and those things constrained by the government, those things constrained by powers that self-regulate in a system called government. I come on here and I proselytize these virtues almost every single day, and yet I'm seeing my country go down the tubes. I'm seeing my country get abused, beaten, and battered by people who occupy positions in that very same system that our constitutional moral order erects to protect individuals. And they are bastardizing and destroying it with their actions. Alvin Bragg is one of them. Look at Alvin Bragg's record. The Heritage Foundation put out a great article that demonstrates the fact that Alvin Bragg has not emphasized the protection of the rights of New York City citizens, of Manhattan citizens, and has instead emphasized the protection of criminals over those individual rights. If you rob someone, even with threat of coercion or violence in Manhattan, that will be reduced or can be reduced to a misdemeanor according to the stuff Alvin Bragg has put out. And he has made other victim crimes with victims, not victimless crimes, crimes with victims have lower penalties than they should. Alvin Bragg has no interest in protecting the rights of his citizens. He has no interest in upholding the principles of justice. He has every interest in appointing himself as judge, jury, executioner, and legislator of a jurisdiction that he is only meant to be the enforcer of. But that's a separate story. The big narrative we've seen coming out of this Trump indictment has been, if it can happen to President Trump, it can happen to anyone. Well, I've got news for you. It has happened to many people, and it continues to happen to many people. In order to solidify this claim, we have to analyze the functions of the criminal justice system in accordance to the principle of justice. So, before we get to that, let's ask ourselves this question, my friends. What is justice? This is the fundamental issue I alluded to a moment ago. Justice is merely the principle, the ethical principle, that A, gives legitimacy for government enforcement arms to be in existence, such as the police, the court, so on and so forth. And B, provides for the protection and safeguard of individuals in their rights and their possessions and their oaths and their contracts, and also assures that everyone is given their due in terms of what they explicitly deserve. So, for example, if I go ahead and make a contract with you that says you have to give me X amount of things on Y day, and we both agree to the contract, and you don't agree with the contract, that is a violation of justice, and you don't fulfill the contract, that's a violation of justice, and that is enough to get you fined or punished. Right? Justice is enforced by the punitive idea. The problem with justice these days is that it has been taken from this universal application which legitimizes law and safeguards rights, and it's been distorted by leftists to mean a collective idea of serving particular groups or identities on the basis of equity, a fundamentally unjust principle, which then creates the environment for so much of the chaos we're seeing around the nation with prosecutorial jurisdictions. There's a reason why crime is going up around cities around America. There's a reason why cities like San Francisco and Chicago, which is elected a socialist, and New York City are experiencing crime waves. It's because under the principle of social justice, not natural justice, not actual justice, under the principle of social justice, certain crimes are being de-emphasized and ignored because allegedly prosecuting those crimes hurts black folks. So we've gone from caring about individual rights to caring about collective rights, and which is a misnomer, by the way, that doesn't exist. And those collective rights are endangering everyone because you cannot legislate on the basis of an illusion. If we ignore reality, reality strikes back. All right, this is going to turn into a rant. This is tough for me, guys. This is tough for me. Some of you may say, why is he not being more composed? Because of what I'm seeing, man. When you study philosophy and you spend your days trying to defend the Republic and people within the system, Sam Adams said the internal machinations of the system of government themselves are a big threat. when you're actually seeing the system work against your own people, it gets tough. Now, as I said, the system has not been working the way it's properly intended to for a very long time. Let us first examine some of these flaws that are most glaring. Let me take you back to North Carolina in 2006. A prosecutor called Mike Nifong, who charged 3 men in the Duke lacrosse team who hired a stripper during one of their celebrations for a victory they had. And one of those strippers accused those 3 men, happened to be white, of raping her, of molesting her. Now, Nifong drugged those 3 men's names to the ringer, did about 50 plus national media interviews saying that they are all rapists. He charged them, and his office harangued them for a very long time, until it came out that actually the person who accused those men of rape changed her story more than once, 2, 3 times. Not only that, but Nifong actually withheld evidence that would have been favorable to exonerating the 3 Duke lacrosse players. He collaborated with the DNA lab director. And of course, many of you know that DNA is the way we can definitively prove if someone was at the scene of the crime or not. So DNA, especially for rape cases, is a way we can actually prove, hey, did you rape that person? It's a way we can actually prove, because if your DNA is not there, then the chances you rape that person is actually much lower. He collaborated with the DNA lab director to withhold evidence and to fudge the results and to lie. And it came out that essentially the 3 men were innocent. Nifong had committed prosecutorial misconduct. He had no physical evidence they had raped the girl. And the woman, after changing her story, just lost all credibility. Those 3 men's lives had already been destroyed because a prosecutor used his status in the community, used his legal power, used his unlimited legal power to tarnish them, and thank God that the case was big enough, got enough national attention, that the 3 men were deemed innocent. Now, what about all of those other hundreds of thousands of millions of people in America who do not have such national attention given to their stories, who are taken advantage of by greedy, unethical, abusive prosecutors? What about them? What about them? The only reason Nifong was even held to account is because there was national attention. But there are plenty of prosecutors who get away with sending innocent people who they know are innocent to jail, and they do so in collaboration with corrupt elements of the law enforcement system. This is not all law enforcers, this is not all police, just corrupt elements of the law enforcement system. Just like the FBI, there are good people in the FBI, I'm sure, some rank and file agents, but the FBI is fundamentally corrupt and needs to be abolished immediately, or else our republic is in danger. So take the story of Nifong and imagine, how often does this kind of thing happen in the criminal justice system? Is this merely an anecdote confined to one person or one instance, or is this more of a general trend? Consider that 98%, upwards of 98% of all federal criminal cases charged by a U.S. attorney end in a plea deal. Now, as a matter of statistics, can we imagine that at least 1% of all those 99 to 98% of people may be innocent? If just 1% of the people who plea to crimes they didn't commit are innocent, or who plead to a guilty to a crime that may have not committed are innocent, how many thousands of people every year or every single month or whatever are being put in jail by crusading prosecutors for things they didn't do? Just 1 person is bad enough. Thousands? That is a national tragedy. And yes, there have been cases of people even being put on death row and being executed for crimes they didn't commit. These are not anecdotes. These are not edge cases. These are a symptom of the sickness that lives in the criminal justice system. And I'm happy more people are finding out the truth because of what's happening to Donald Trump, the J6ers, who have also been taken advantage of by zealous prosecutors who, by the way, have been reprimanded by judges several times for the nature of their charges. And the fact that prosecutors in the J6 case have had to plead down several charges because they don't have enough evidence to justify insurrection. And yet, when the prosecutions of the J6ers began, the DOJ and the FBI were touting the idea that these were insurrectionist terrorists that were trying to destroy America when they didn't have the evidence to assert that for sure, and using their political, social, and legal status, they destroyed the reputations of the thousands of people who were at J6, and they also, by virtue of what they did, managed to craft a narrative that some people still believe and still cling on to when they try to understand the January 6th situation. There is an illness in the criminal justice system that must be addressed. What about the fact that there's a doctrine in that same system called sovereign immunity, which shields prosecutors from being held accountable unless they give you permission to hold them accountable? The idea of sovereign immunity goes back to British common law, and that basically meant that the king could do no wrong. So there was this odd idea that the king could do no wrong. Now, America was actually a rejection of this idea. The grievances, Declaration of Independence, all those things were actually a rejection of the idea that the king could do no wrong. Not only did the early Americans believe the king could do wrong, they believed the king did do wrong and asserted their natural rights over his authority and validated his authority and broke away from his political control by asserting their rational powers as men and by using their rational power to instill force to defend their rights. But there is a doctrine in the same government that defied a tyrannical king that says the king, the government, can do no wrong. And only in very specific cases has the government actually waived their immunity. So the government protects itself, the government regulates itself, and what happens? What is happening? Well, what happens is there are prosecutors who, except in extreme cases like Nifong, where they are just exposed and they are clearly doing something corrupt, can get away with doing the most egregious things, and they cannot be held accountable because they are protected by the false doctrine, the unjust doctrine of sovereign immunity. This is part of the sickness that is in the American criminal justice system. This goes deep, guys. These are all facts. This goes deep. I've been screaming about this for years. This goes deep. The fact that you have innocent people pleading guilty because they're afraid of what could happen if they go to trial and lose for crimes they didn't commit happens all the time. All the time, because people are just afraid. Well, what if prosecutors will sometimes even harangue people saying, well, if you take this deal, you'll get this amount of time, but if you go to trial, you get more time. This is what happens in the American criminal justice system. How about the FBI, which has come under scrutiny recently for its unjust raid of Mar-a-Lago and for other things it's done? In fact, the FBI forged a letter to Dr. King encouraging him to kill himself at the height of his career in the 60s. The fact that the FBI essentially did a raid on the Black Panthers and killed one of their leaders, helped kill one of their leaders because they were a quote-unquote domestic terrorist organization. The fact that the FBI has been at the lead of the J6 persecutions and the narrative crafting around that, despite the fact that all that stuff has been largely proven to be false. The FBI showed the Hunter Biden laptop story, which we now know was true. The FBI has been at the center of so much abuse. The fact that J. Edgar Hoover wiretapped King during his tenure illegally. The FBI has been at the helm of so much abuse and rights violation in the history of the United States that it is a wonder that it is still alive. It is a wonder that it is still around. All of this stuff is public record. This is part of the illness which infects the American criminal justice system. The fact that until Edward Snowden had blown the whistle, there was a massive, and there still is a massive roving national surveillance program authorized by the rubber stamp FISA courts, which allow the NSA to look at your data and your messages whenever they want to under the auspices of national security. Here's another instance when you have an abstract concept that then meets concrete actions and behavior, which justifies behavior that would under any other principle be unjustified. The principle of justice has become replaced by abstract concepts meant to fuel and to justify the existence of the administrative state and their machinations. That's the NSA. People are mad about the Restrict Act, which is a bad act, by the way, which would give the administrative state even more power to control what you can do on the internet. But they still have that power anyway. This is part of the illness that runs through the American criminal justice system. So many people look at the mechanics of a particular system and see if the mechanics are working well, but they never consider, is the system functioning properly? You can look at the mechanics of a car, and the mechanics may be doing well, but if the car is not able to get you effectively from point A to point B, the car is not working properly. The car is not doing what it is meant to do. The mechanics of the system, in this case, many of those mechanics may seem to be working well. Prosecutors have the ability, for example, to present indictments, to charge, do all kinds of things. The mechanics are working well, but are they using those powers according to just principles? No, they are not in many cases. The condition of the system that we have entrusted to assert justice in defense of the citizenry has deviated from that purpose. And those deviations are protected by sovereign immunity, by qualified immunity, by these doctrines that the state uses to shield itself. This is part of the illness that is infecting the American criminal justice system. The fact that emotive language, for example, can be used to justify certain crimes. So many of you have heard the phrase, no one is above the law. Many of you have heard that phrase applied to Donald Trump. No one is above the law, all that crap. When no one actually looks at the phrase itself and asks themselves, what in the world does that mean? What's important? So there's two things. There's an idea, then there is what does that idea represent? The idea of nothing being above the law, the idea of above the law essentially means that the rule of law is important. But what does that idea represent? The rule of law presupposes that the law everyone should be held to an equal standard according to the law, and they should fall on that equal standard. Okay, what if the law is not applied equally? The rule of law cannot be just if it is not applied equally to everyone according to their actions. If it is only applied selectively according to the preferences of prosecutors and people within the system, you don't have a rule of law, you have a rule of opinion. You have a rule of special interests. And that is what we're seeing with the Donald Trump prosecution. That is what we have been seeing with the refusal to prosecute Hillary Clinton, despite the fact that we know that she committed several crimes. We're seeing the rule of special interest and not the rule of law. So that's one thing. If you can't apply the rule of law equally, it's not the rule of law. Second thing, if the law that you're trying to put me under the rule under is unjust, the rule of law does not apply, because the rule of law presupposes that the law that is being enforced is a law that is morally correct. No one would seriously make the argument that we should abide by the rule of law if the law authorized random killing of someone because you didn't like them. Obviously, that would be a morally unjust law. Morality is not sourced from the law. Morality comes from a source outside of the law, outside of society. It is then therefore translated into society by rational men who have proper grasp over reality, and then that is imprinted into the letter of law. The problem is the reverse is happening. Law is being treated as the arbiter of morality, the arbiter of goodness, the arbiter of what is true and correct, and actual morality is being ignored. Morality is being treated, and is treated these days by intellectuals, as a social construct. This is what you hear a lot of woke people say. This is what you hear a lot of people on the left say when they try to justify certain things. But morality is not a social construct. Morality are the definitive principles that a society must abide by, that individuals out there in the society must abide by, if that society is to continue to exist in a manner that is not chaotic and is not one that breaks down into enmity and fighting. Once again, this is the illness of our criminal justice system. The phrase, no one is above the law, is more emotional than it is substantive. It is more performative than it is necessary, because it never asks the important questions about the law. What does the law say? Is the law actually just? It just presupposes all of these things and never challenges the premise. If you never check your premises, you will always lead yourself to the wrong answer. We have a system An injustice system overrun with accountable actors, emotional language masquerading as substantive law, a false conception of morality, an unrestrained power given to people who rule on the basis of special interests, not on the basis of equality before the law. That has to change. The indictment of President Trump has revealed many of these things, and thank God for that. However, President Trump's not the only victim. This system has been doing this for a very long time. The people in the system have been doing this for a very long time. And all people of moral conscience, all rational people, all people who love America, you should be standing up against this. Because this moral travesty will not come to an end until the citizenry says the government needs to be limited, the administrative state needs to be abolished, the FBI, these agencies need to be abolished, and we need to get rid of old world concepts like sovereign immunity and qualified immunity, which protect the state from its own citizens. People should not be afraid of the government. The government should be afraid of their people, as V in V for Vendetta said. That is the entire idea of popular sovereignty. That is the entire idea of checks and balances. That is the entire idea. That is why the American public is so unique. Because it says, yes, we have a government to filter out the passions of the majority, but the minority in the country will still be protected by certain principles that go beyond the government and that put an imposition on them. But the government has been expanding and ignoring those principles at the behest of anti-American ideologies that have been present in our country, in our legal system, since the progressive era, that have not stopped their long march through our institutions. A moral citizenry must assert itself now. We must stand athwart history and say stop before this long march overtakes us all and the republic is no more. We can fight this. We can turn this around. We can do this, ladies and gentlemen. But it'll take, number one, a return to first principles. Number two, studying philosophy, understanding what is true, understanding how you know what you know, understanding how to justify what you know beyond simply saying it's common sense, understanding how to be rigorous in your thinking. And number three, being a virtuous person, which goes into philosophy, understanding what is virtuous and what is not virtuous, and how to assert that in politics as well. We can turn this around, my friends, and we will turn this around if we remember, as Americans, where our tradition and our country came from. My friends, I love you guys so much. This was an emotional one, but it's necessary. If you guys want to support me, be sure to like this video, comment on this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel. I love you guys so much, and please stay pensive. God bless. We will turn this around, and America will remain the beacon of freedom in this world. Bye, everyone.